I have been on the bench long enough to know that there are moments when a courtroom stops being a room and becomes a mirror. It stops reflecting legal procedure and starts reflecting character. That happened the instant Ethan Graves struck his 70-year-old mother in my courtroom. I did not need a psychologist, a social worker, or a stack of expert reports to tell me what kind of son I was looking at. I saw it in the raised hand that lingered in the air after the slap. I saw it in the smirk that sat where remorse should have been. I saw it in the way his mother, Marilyn Graves, staggered under fluorescent lights and still whispered, "Please don't." Not because she was protecting herself, but because she was protecting him. That is not love. That is damage that has been trained to answer to his name. People ask me all the time how I know when a case is really about more than money. This is how. The paperwork says one thing, the people say another. On paper, this was a dispute about a loan, missing property, and a son who had not repaid what he owed. In real life, it was about control, humiliation, fear, and a 70-year-old woman who had spent so long making excuses for her son that she no longer knew where his behavior ended and her guilt began. The moment he slapped her, he told the truth faster than any witness ever could. The sound of that slap traveled through the courtroom before anyone breathed again. The bailiff moved immediately. The gallery recoiled. Marilyn gripped the witness stand with thin, trembling fingers, trying to hold on to dignity while the red print of her son's hand bloomed against her cheek. Ethan did not look shocked by what he had done. He looked inconvenienced by the reaction to it. That is an important distinction. A person who loses control and is horrified by it is one kind of problem. A person who uses force and then acts as though everyone else is being dramatic is another. I told him to put his hand down. He did it slowly, almost lazily, as if lowering it were a favor to me instead of the bare minimum required of an adult who had just assaulted his own mother in open court. That told me something else. This was not his first time intimidating someone. It was simply the first time he had done it in a room where intimidation had no legal value. When I asked him his name for the record, he answered with the clipped arrogance of a man who thought names mattered only when they carried power. Ethan Graves, late 30s, shoulders broad, chin high, the kind of posture men use when they mistake aggression for authority. Then I turned to Marilyn, 70 years old, soft voice, hands shaking so hard the tissue between her fingers was reduced to confetti. She said she did not mean for things to get heated. Heated. That is what women say when they have spent years downgrading danger so they can survive it. I asked her what happened right before he struck her. She said she had asked him for what he owed, $18,000 she had loaned him the year before when he came to her in tears, claiming he was about to be evicted. He told her he had nowhere to go. He told her he would be sleeping in his car. He told her he was humiliated and desperate. She believed him because that is what mothers do. She reached into savings meant for the final fragile years of her own life and handed him the money because she thought not doing so might cost her her son. That is the cruel genius of manipulation inside families. It knows exactly which love to exploit and exactly what fear to awaken. When I asked him whether he had repaid her, he deflected. He said she exaggerated everything. He said it had been a gift. He said his mother rewrote history because she was forgetful. Let me tell you something. People who want to control you will often try to make your memory stand trial before they do. If they can make you doubt what you heard, what you saw, what you signed, what you felt, then they can move through your life like a thief with a flashlight and never once call themselves a criminal. I asked Marilyn whether there had been yelling, threats, grabbing, throwing things. She tried to protect him. They almost always do. But when I told her I needed plain answers, not excuses, she lifted her sleeve and showed me the bruise on her forearm. Yellow, purple, fading, but not gone. Old enough to be denied, new enough to be remembered. She said he had grabbed her when she tried to take back her checkbook. He interrupted immediately to say he had only stopped her from doing something reckless. That word reckless sat in the room like poison. He had taken her money, her peace, and her property, and still wanted the language of responsibility. Then I asked the question that so often matters most. Did anyone else witness anything? Marilyn looked toward the side door with the fearful reflex of someone who has been trained to measure every word against possible retaliation. She mentioned a neighbor, Rebecca Shaw, 8 years next door, mid-50s. No interest in drama. She came forward and did what decent neighbors do when they realize normal has become dangerous. She told me she had heard yelling again and again. She told me the tone had changed over recent months from argument to hostility. Then she told me she had seen Ethan carrying storage boxes out of Marilyn's home. Multiple boxes, fast, purposeful, like a man moving things he did not want noticed. That changed the case immediately, because now we were no longer dealing only with an unpaid loan. We were dealing with secret removal of property. Rebecca said some boxes had labels on them: bedroom, memorabilia, jewelry. Marilyn's face changed when she heard that. Confusion first, then betrayal, then the beginning of recognition. That is another thing I have seen on the bench many times. The slow, horrifying moment when a victim realizes the losses she had been explaining away were not accidents, not forgetfulness, not age, but theft committed by someone she loved. I asked Ethan what was in the boxes. He said they were mostly his. Rebecca corrected him without heat. Some of those labels were Marilyn's. Then Marilyn began naming what was missing: wedding china, photo albums, her husband Bill's watch, the quilt her mother made with her own hands. Ethan called them dust collectors. I told him no, they were not dust collectors. They were history, grief, marriage, motherhood, continuity, memory. When a man sells such things out from under his own mother, he is not decluttering a house. He is liquidating a life. The clerk pulled up online listings. I wanted documentation, not theater. There they were on the monitor for everyone to see: the dresser, the china, the quilt, the fishing gear, and Bill's watch displayed for strangers like inventory from an estate sale. Except the owner was alive and sitting 12 feet away watching her marriage and memories priced for quick pickup. One by one, the listings told the truth Ethan would not. Offers pending, messages exchanged, cash expected. He said he was only testing the market. That is the kind of lie people tell when the evidence is already doing the talking. When I had the listing for the watch enlarged, Marilyn almost came apart in front of me. She recognized it instantly. Bill wore it every Sunday, not because it was expensive, because it belonged to the rhythm of their life together. Church, supper, family, ordinary rituals that become sacred only after someone dies and can no longer perform them beside you. Ethan said he deserved it after everything he had done for her. That phrase matters: deserve. It tells you how he saw the relationship, not as a bond of care, but as an account from which he was entitled to withdraw. Then I asked about the watch box, because if you have been doing this long enough, you learn that people who strip mine sentimental property often make mistakes around containers, documentation, and packaging. He froze. He told me it was just a box. It was not just a box. The box led to the buyer, and the buyer led to another truth. Daniel Trent came into court carrying the velvet pouch. He said Ethan told him the watch belonged to his mother. Then he added the detail that broke the room open. Ethan had said his mother was dead. He told the buyer he needed money because he was moving her into a facility. The watch was sold, the box was sold, the lie was sold with them. I asked Marilyn whether she knew anything about a facility. The answer was immediate and terrified. No. Ethan began to call it planning. Planning ahead, exploring options, thinking practically. Nonsense. Practical planning does not require forged signatures and expedited admission packets hidden from the person being institutionalized. The bailiff brought me the paperwork. Pleasant Pines long-term care facility, signature line completed, date scheduled for the next morning. I asked Marilyn whether she had ever seen the forms. She had not. Then Ethan admitted, with astonishing stupidity, that he traced her signature. There are moments when a courtroom becomes physically still, not quiet, still. This was one of them. He had taken her money, sold her property, and now admitted forging legal documents to move her into institutional care without her knowledge. Why? Because, as the case would soon show, removing Marilyn solved multiple problems for him at once. It gave him access, it removed resistance, it accelerated inheritance, it turned a living mother into an administrative obstacle to be processed out of the house. When I followed his line of sight, I found Lena Porter in the second row, girlfriend, assistant in the scheme. She admitted helping fill out forms because Ethan told her Marilyn was slipping mentally and wanted placement. She said he told her the house would practically be theirs once Marilyn got settled and things were finalized. That phrase, settled, tells you everything. He was not arranging care, he was staging displacement. He wanted the house, and he wanted the moral cover of pretending he was the responsible son stepping in. I looked at Marilyn and asked the question that had been growing larger with every answer. Did you know your son wanted your home? The pain on her face at that moment was not theatrical grief. It was the look of a woman realizing that the future she thought she was financing for her son was really a future without herself in it. She had not been helping him survive. She had been funding her own removal. Then came the emotional motive he clung to like a life raft: childhood resentment. He said Marilyn had favored his sister. He said he was always the burden. Marilyn quietly reminded the room that the sister had been dead for 12 years. That mattered, because his grievance was no longer even tethered to present reality. He had built a private mythology in which every theft was compensation and every lie was overdue balance. Once a person starts narrating his cruelty as reimbursement, he becomes very dangerous indeed. I asked him again about the loan. Why had Marilyn given him $18,000 in the first place? She told me he had shown up crying, claiming eviction. The records showed that was false. He had never been behind on rent. Not one day. He had manufactured a crisis, used tears as leverage, and taken her savings under false pretenses. When confronted, he said he needed it to sound urgent. Think about that. He did not merely lie. He designed emotional emergency to activate maternal rescue. At that point, I requested full financial records. I wanted to know whether the $18,000 was the whole theft or only the flagship offense. The statements told an uglier story. Recurring withdrawals, $800, $400, $600. Cash pulled in patterns that suggested normalized access rather than isolated desperation. Over 3 months, he had drained nearly $5,000 more through repeated transactions while maintaining the fiction that he was helping her manage things. He said she always said yes. I corrected him immediately. That was not consent. That was intimidation layered over dependency. Here is what people do not always understand about elder exploitation. It is rarely only about money. Money is simply the easiest evidence to chart. The deeper theft is autonomy, choice, confidence. The victim begins to doubt her own bookkeeping, her own memory, her own right to say no. Marilyn said, I thought my savings were safe. Of course she did. Safety is supposed to be the baseline inside one's own home. Ethan converted that home into a harvest field. Eventually, I asked him the question that cuts through rationalization better than almost any other. Did you ever intend to repay your mother? He said no. Not only no, but no, because she owed him after everything he had put up with. That was the moral center of the case. Not confusion, not bad planning, not stress, entitlement. He believed he was owed money, property, labor, patience, and eventually the house itself, because he had endured being her son on his own terms. I explained to him that responsibility grows from love, not domination. You do not support a parent by isolating her, forging her signature, selling her husband's watch, and draining her bank account. You do not protect someone by making them smaller. You protect them by preserving what remains of their independence while helping where help is wanted. He had done the opposite at every turn. By then, Marilyn had undergone a shift. I wish I could bottle and hand to every victim who walks into my courtroom apologizing for the person who harms them. She began the hearing afraid, reflexively minimizing, still trying to keep Ethan from consequences. She ended it seeing clearly. She said to him that she loved him enough to believe his stories, but she had learned that love cannot survive where honesty will not live. That may have been the most important sentence spoken all day, not because it was clever, because it was true. My ruling was straightforward: full repayment of the $18,000, compensation for every item sold, immediate return of all unsold property, preservation orders regarding accounts and sale platforms, referral of the forged facility paperwork and trace signature to the proper authorities. I also made it clear for the record and for Marilyn's sake, that this matter would not simply vanish into the fog of family business. Abuse inside a family is still abuse. Theft by a son is still theft. Forgery in the name of care is still forgery. He said the amount was impossible. I told him impossibility was not my concern. Consequences rarely arrive at a convenient time. That is why people should consider them before they commit acts requiring them. Then I turned to Marilyn. I told her something I want repeated to every elderly parent who finds herself making excuses for a grown child who uses fear as a management style. You deserve safety, you deserve dignity, you deserve to occupy your own life without being managed out of it by someone who calls exploitation help. I meant every word. People sometimes ask me whether defendants like Ethan change. Some do, many do not. But that was not my job that day. My job was not to guarantee his transformation. My job was to restore Marilyn's footing, document the truth, and make sure the law did not collaborate with the lie that family excuses everything. A courtroom is not a miracle factory. It is a place where facts get names and consequences get signatures. When the matter concluded, Ethan had shrunk visibly. Not because I yelled, I did not need to. Noise is often wasted on people like him. What breaks them is clarity, the collapse of narrative, the moment when every story they built to justify themselves is taken apart in public and laid next to receipts, listings, and forged forms. He finally understood that he was not the misunderstood son in a family squabble. He was a man who had tried to monetize his mother's history and warehouse her out of the way. Marilyn, by contrast, stood straighter by the end than she had at the beginning. Not because the pain vanished, it did not, but because pain named accurately is lighter than pain carried alone in confusion. She had spent too long wondering whether she was overreacting, misremembering, being unfair, being difficult. By the time she walked out of my courtroom, she knew what had happened to her. That matters. Truth is stabilizing, even when it hurts. Let me say one final thing directly. If you are caring for an aging parent, care is not control. Care is not access without accountability. Care is not turning passwords, checkbooks, jewelry drawers, and legal forms into shortcuts to your own comfort. Care is patient, documented, respectful, and transparent. Anything less drifts quickly toward abuse, and abuse loves to dress itself in family language because family language buys it time. Ethan Graves slapped his mother in my courtroom, but the slap was only the loudest part of a much longer crime. The real violence had been underway for months. The lies, the withdrawals, the stolen objects, the forged signature, the planned removal, the reduction of a living woman into an obstacle to be managed. That is what I shut down. Not just the hand, the whole machinery behind it. After the ruling, I ordered the bailiff to remain with Marilyn until she was safely out of the courthouse. That was not theater. That was caution. People like Ethan often become most unpredictable when they realize the story is no longer theirs to control. Exposure is a dangerous moment for an abuser. It strips away the lie, and once the lie is gone, some of them will do almost anything to get the old balance back. I was not going to let Marilyn leave that room without structure, support, and a clear record of what had happened. I also directed the clerk to preserve every exhibit: the sales listings, the buyer messages, the bank statements, the forged admission packet, the traced signature, and the communications connected to the attempted placement. Documentation matters. In cases involving family exploitation, shame and confusion are often the defendant's greatest allies. If the evidence remains scattered, the abuser can keep moving, keep reframing, keep insisting that everyone misunderstood. Once the record is organized, the fog begins to clear. That is why paperwork is not cold. Paperwork protects people. Then I said something directly to Marilyn that I wish every elderly parent could hear before matters go this far. Aging does not make you public property for your children. It does not turn your home into a waiting room for their ambitions. It does not convert your bank account into emergency funding for their lies. Needing help in one area of life does not erase your right to choose, to refuse, to question, to review, or to remain where you are. If anyone tells you otherwise, they are not helping you. They are positioning themselves over you. Marilyn nodded while I said those things, but I could see how much work it took for the words to land. People who have spent years protecting someone harmful do not simply flip a switch and become free. They have habits of minimization, reflexes of apology. They hear themselves say, "He didn't mean it," before they have even checked whether that is true. They say he gets stressed when what they mean is, "I'm afraid of what happens when he is angry." My job in that courtroom was not merely to enter judgment, it was to interrupt the language of denial and replace it with language that matched reality. Ethan tried one last time to reclaim the narrative. He called out that he had only done what he did because Marilyn made him feel like a failure, because she worried too much, because she never believed in him. I shut that down immediately. Feelings are not legal exemptions. Hurt pride does not authorize theft. Resentment does not excuse forgery. Family disappointment does not create a right to strip a parent of her autonomy and liquidate her memories. Adults are responsible for what they do with their grievances. They do not get to file them as reimbursement claims against the elderly. Lena Porter sat there crying by then, and I addressed her too. I told her that helping someone fill out fraudulent paperwork in the name of care is still participation. Good intentions are not a magic eraser. If you are involved in changing an older person's living situation, finances, or legal status, your responsibility is to verify, not assume. If the elder has not spoken for herself, if signatures look wrong, if timelines are rushed, if secrecy is required, stop. Ask questions, walk away, call someone. Too many people become accomplices because they prefer loyalty to scrutiny. I thanked Daniel Trent for returning the watch and pouch. Honest third parties matter more than they realize. One person willing to tell the truth can rescue a whole case from ambiguity. The same goes for neighbors. Rebecca Shaw did what good neighbors do. She paid attention. She noticed the sound of fear behind the wall. She noticed boxes leaving the house. She did not dismiss her instincts as nosiness. She treated them as concern. That matters. Abuse survives on privacy, but exploitation often leaves visible footprints for anyone willing to see them. After the parties left, I sat for a moment before calling the next case. Courtrooms continue, and that is as it should be, but some cases leave an imprint. This one did. Not because it was unusual, sadly, but because it was familiar in all the wrong ways. I have seen versions of Ethan before. The entitled child who becomes the embittered adult. The rescuer who is really a collector. The son or daughter who says, "I'm the only one helping," while draining the parent dry. They often arrive with the same posture and the same language. Everything is for the elder's own good until someone asks for receipts. That is another truth people need to hear. Real care is transparent. Real care does not fear records. It does not hide withdrawals, passwords, checkbooks, or jewelry. It does not punish questions. It does not rush signatures. It does not isolate the elder from friends, neighbors, and independent voices. It does not create emergencies that only one person can solve. If the so-called helper is always the interpreter, always the gatekeeper, always the one saying, "Don't worry, I'll handle it," then worry. That sentence has covered a lot of theft over the years. I do not know whether Ethan will change. Courts are not miracle factories. They are places where facts are named and consequences are attached to conduct. Change, when it comes, belongs to the person who chooses it. What the court can do is stop the advancement of harm. It can say clearly and publicly, this is not a misunderstanding, this is not a family quirk, and this is not what love looks like. Before I moved on, I looked at Marilyn one last time. She was standing straighter than when the hearing began, not because the pain had vanished, it had not, but because pain with a name is easier to carry than pain wrapped in confusion. She no longer had to wonder whether she was overreacting, forgetting, or being unfair. She knew her things had been taken. Her money had been drained. Her signature had been forged. Her son had raised his hand to her. The truth was awful, but it was solid. Solid truth is the first floor justice can offer. So let me say this plainly. Ethan Graves did not only slap his mother in court. The slap was simply the loudest part of a much longer assault. The real violence had been underway for months. The lies, the false crisis, the repeated withdrawals, the hidden sales, the forged paperwork, the plan to remove Marilyn from her own home before she fully understood what was happening. That is what I shut down. Not just a hand in the air, the whole machinery behind it. And that is exactly why my courtroom exists. If that sounds severe, good. Severity is sometimes the only response when love has been turned into leverage and age mistaken for weakness. A courtroom cannot restore innocence, but it can restore boundaries, records, property, and the right to say no again today.
This courtroom story hits hard because it exposes something deeper than just money or family conflict. It shows how abuse inside families often hides behind words like care, stress, and help. Ethan Graves didn't just steal from his elderly mother. He slowly tried to take away her independence, dignity, memories, and control over her own life. The most powerful moment in the story wasn't even the slap in the courtroom. It was the realization that Marilyn had spent years protecting the very person who was exploiting her. That happens far too often in real life. Victims of family abuse frequently minimize the harm, because admitting the truth means accepting that someone they love is capable of hurting them. The judge's commentary makes an important point. Elder abuse is rarely only about money. Financial exploitation usually comes with emotional manipulation, intimidation, isolation, and control. Ethan used guilt, fake emergencies, lies, and fear to access his mother's savings and property. He even forged documents to place her into a care facility without her knowledge, all while pretending he was acting responsibly. Another strong theme is accountability. The courtroom became the one place where manipulation stopped working because evidence replaced excuses. The neighbor who spoke up, the buyer who returned the watch, and the preserved records all mattered because abuse survives when people stay silent or uncertain. The judge also draws a clear line between genuine caregiving and control. Real care is transparent, respectful, and centered on the elder person's wishes. Abuse, on the other hand, often disguises itself as "I'm just trying to help." That distinction is incredibly important, especially as more families deal with aging parents and financial dependence. Marilyn's transformation throughout the hearing is what gives the story emotional weight. She begins frightened, apologetic, and unsure of herself, but by the end she sees the situation clearly. The judge's statement that truth is stabilizing even when it hurts becomes the emotional core of the entire case. Overall, this story is less about punishment and more about exposing the machinery of manipulation that can grow inside families when entitlement replaces love. It's a reminder that being family does not excuse abuse, and that protecting vulnerable people sometimes requires firm legal boundaries, public accountability, and the courage to call exploitation by its real name.